When we hear the word ascension, many images probably come to mind. But to truly ascend, one must go inward first. It is only by communing with the divine spirit within, growing in consciousness, and practicing the presence of God that we can truly rise above the turmoil and distractions of this present world. True spiritual growth cannot be attained inside of a building constructed by human hands, nor can it be found at the feet of some special teacher. It can only be discovered in the secret chamber of your own heart. Are you ready to ascend? Then light the candle of your mind and soul and enter in. Welcome. Greetings, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Ascension Podcast. I'm your host, Paul James Caiden, and this week on the show, we are going to be talking about a very interesting topic, or rather asking a very interesting question, and that is, who is or who was Melchizedek? Being a student of religion and the Bible, I've heard for years individuals who would read through the Bible, the Old Testament, and the New Testament, where it said that Jesus was a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek, and people would say, who was that guy? Where did he come from? How was he a priest forever? Was this Jesus himself visiting Abraham in the Old Testament? Well, we're going to get to all those questions and answers because the Urantia Book has a lot to say about this individual Melchizedek. And here to help us delve into the mystery of who this individual was is Mr. Richard E. Warren, who is an author and student of the Urantia Book. He has such titles as Resurrection Hall, A Mansion World Odyssey, The Midwayers, The Planet's Permanent Citizens, and The Melchizedek Mission, Salvaging Truth. Richard, welcome to the show today.
Oh, thanks, Paul. Glad to be here.
Yeah, it's going to be, you don't hear many people talk about this topic, really, who was Melchizedek, though it's been an age-old question, who was he, where did he come from, how was, Jesus a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. So being one who wrote a book on this particular topic, which I own, I haven't read yet, but it's coming up in my personal reading, tell us a little bit about who Melchizedek was. Who was he? Where did he come from? Why was he here? And why is he this eternal priest figure?
Well, the reason I wrote the book was to answer all these questions because the Urantia Book, like you said, was really expanded our knowledge about who he was and what he was here for. And the Bible only mentions him, I think, once or twice in Hebrews and in Genesis, and says very little about him. He, it turns out, is the actual Melchizedek was one of many of his order of sonship. His actual name is Makaventa Melchizedek. The UB authors name about, I think it's 4 or 5 of the Melchizedeks, but he's definitely the most prominent one, and he was here for 94 years. He incarnated 4,000 years ago in the what is now in the area that is now in Jerusalem. It was Salem back then, and he became known as the Sage of Salem.
Yeah, and a lot of people, wondering who he was when you read in the Old Testament where it said Abraham spoke to the angel of the Lord. The Urantia Book says that this was actually many times where he went out and spoke to Melchizedek himself, but they somehow translated it or worded it that he was speaking to the Lord or the angel of the Lord rather than Melchizedek.
Yeah, the Urantia Book informs us that the priesthood removed all the references except a few to Melchizedek, and then because they wanted to promote Abraham and his spiritual superiority. He could speak with angels and was in contact with God, according to a lot of the scholarly stuff that's been written about him from those few words that are in the Bible.
Yeah, that seems to be the thing, Old and New Testament, that a lot of people don't really like to hear that, or they don't. And I'm not bashing the Bible. I mean, I read the Bible. It's part of my foundation of my spiritual beliefs and faith. But it seems throughout time, whether it was the rabbis or even the Roman Church, there were things that were edited out or translated in a certain way, to kind of prop up their beliefs, their doctrines, rather than what it actually said, and which is sad, because we lost, I think, a lot of elements of truth by man tampering with so much of the texts.
Yeah, I don't intend to bash the Bible either, but we really get an expanded view of who Melchizedek is in the Urantia Book. Paper 93, is the main source, but he appears throughout the text. He was, of course, the purpose of his mission was to pave the way for Jesus' incarnation, and this he did. They say it was 1973 years before Jesus was born that Melchizedek appeared on the scene. And when he did, he was just incarnated one day. His body was provided by the life carriers and the physical controllers, other orders of celestial beings who are able to provide bodies for incarnating descending sons like Melchizedek. When they gave him a full-grown man's body, and he immediately went to a Chaldean shepherd's tent and introduced himself. This shepherd was named Andon, no, not Andon, Ardon, I think. Oh, I'm getting the names confused. But he was successful in presenting himself to this man, this shepherd, and he invited him to dinner. He was so impressed with him, and that became the start of his mission. He went from that introduction to starting a school, a university that made Salem an actual that put Salem at the crossroads of the ancient caravan trails back then. People, when they found out about his school, they started sending their children there, and he got a reputation all over Eurasia and Africa as a spiritual school. And he also formed a corps of missionaries who went in all directions from the Mesopotamian area and spread the Melchizedek Gospel, which was simply that there is but one God. And, of course, we all know about the covenant that he made with Abraham. And we get all the details for that in the Urantia Book. Abraham, I guess, came along. Well, Melchizedek's life or incarnation was 94 years. And he appeared on the scene. He started his school. He he gathered able students and made them into missionaries. And then he wanted to get someone who could carry on his work after he was gone. And Abraham was the one that he chose. Abraham at the time was living in Ur, and he got a message from Melchizedek, who he had no idea that Melchizedek knew who he was, and he knew his family lineage. He'd been watching that family for a long time, and maybe one of the reasons that he incarnated when he did was because he knew that there was going to be a leader type appear in this one family in Ur, which they say had produced many leaders in the past. So Abraham packed up his army and took off to Salem whenever he got the call from Melchizedek, and he joined the school there, and he became a devoted student. And he still had some human tendencies. He wanted to be a king, and he and Melchizedek didn't exactly agree on Abraham's ambitions, but he finally brought him around, and he became a spiritual warrior in place of being he gave up his king's ambition.
Now, it's interesting when you say, that he came and he started, a school, and some people might say, well, I don't know about that, guys. This sounds a little, far out in the weeds. But you have to think that, and the Urantia Book explains this, that individuals like Melchizedek, whose message was spread far and wide, which is why there's elements, that common thread that runs through a lot of religions because of those missionaries that went out. But we also have a lot of stories from different cultures about these individuals that they, civilizations said, they were gods. They came down to teach us, and they showed us these certain things, or they taught us about God. And the Urantia Book really does cover who a lot of these individuals were, that they weren't gods, coming from Mars or, wherever, to, teach man to plant corn and, do New Age things with crystals or, whatever the case may be. But, there were certain times throughout human history where great teachers, did appear, and some of them, being students or missionaries of someone like, Melchizedek, and, because their wisdom was so great, they said, well, these individuals are gods, so we could certainly see these stories about those who came down from the heavens and, starting, these schools to teach man and, their wisdom and the truths of, life for the universe. To me, it's very plausible, that this is where a lot of these legends and stories, came from, Melchizedek being one of them, that somebody might have said, well, he was a god,
Yeah, apparently we're well cared for and watched over, and the evolution of our world is really something that is aided and assisted by these descending sons like Melchizedek. The Urantia Book, which claims to be a revelation of truth, of history, of science, and one of the first epochs in our history after human will evolved was the visit of the Planetary Prince. And he came with a staff of 100, and they put the foundation stones of civilization in place by, like you say, planting. They taught people to be. They changed them from hunters to herders to gardeners, and that the Planetary Prince was here 500,000 years ago, and the next set of descending sons, of course, was Adam and Eve. That was 38,000 years ago, and those two were followed by Machabenta, which was 4,000 years ago, 2,000 years before Christ. And then Jesus came along as the fourth being to descend to Earth, Urantia, and give us that shot in the arm that they're supposed to do. It's all part of God's plan. And the fifth, of course, visitation from above is this book, this Urantia book that we got Melchizedek's story out of.
Which again, that does make a lot more sense than whether, God just creating the world and, he's close to mankind for a while, but then he says, all right, you guys just have to figure it out. You got the devil down there, you got all this other stuff you got to, try to sort through. And I'm just kind of stepping back and, you got to figure it out and hopefully figure it out right, or you're going to heaven or you're going to hell, It makes a lot more sense that there's an active participation throughout the ages of, God trying to help us and bring us to himself.
Yeah, and there are many more coming, according to the Urantia book. We'll keep receiving these divine descenders one after another until the planet reaches a state of light and life, they call it, a sort of a utopian era when the planet approaches the state of perfection. But we're looked after, we're watched over, and even this minute, our guardian angels are here with us. We aren't abandoned or orphaned at all. God is here, and we will see more of his sons and daughters come to enlighten us and lift us and elevate civilization, and they just won't quit coming until we succeed. But the Urantia book does say there will be, repeated retrogressions, that all societies and civilizations on the evolving planets have these retrogressions, but it may be one step backwards, but it's always two steps forward. And progress is the watchword of the universe, we are told. And the universe itself, we are told, is one vast school. So we're really watched over in ways that most of us don't even know. And it's such a blessed thing when you think about it. It's really humbling.
It is.
Think about how God really cares for us and never stops.
But this bears a question, and usually when I have a guest and we're talking about something like the Urantia book and Melchizedek, I usually ask because there's kind of a wide variety of people that listen to this show, and some of them are more leaning toward just traditional or evangelical Christianity, and they might hear something and say, hey, wait a minute, Jesus is the one who's supposed to come back and set it right. What are you talking about? These other beings, those would be devils or demons. To those listeners, to those people, what would you say to them to put their mind at ease, to realize that anybody that's going to come, they're all going to be coming from the same team. They're not.
Yeah, exactly.
But how would you how would you help people to understand or be more comfortable with the idea that if things work out in our planet's history, perhaps different than what they've been taught, or a little differently than they've been taught in churches, that it's not the day of evil descending upon us? What would you say to those folks that maybe make them a little more comfortable with this notion?
That's a great question. Um, you know, when I found the Urantia book, it just resonated with me. It, it, it was an actual religious experience. I said, this is the book that I've been looking for all my life. I was like so many baby boomers who had been reading spiritually oriented books all our lives, looking for truth. We were hungry. Sometimes I think that maybe that was part of our life plan. But when I found the book, I just knew that this was something special, important. And I spent the next year reading it and studying it. And every day since then, just about, I've spent about 4 or 5 hours either studying or writing about it or doing something to get the teachings out there. And we've seen the reader base expand. It's really growing in exponential ways right now. And I think that's because people have this hunger for truth. Now, if you're talking about trying to present truth or revelation or the Urantia book to somebody who simply is not rooted in seeking for truth or isn't hungry for more truth, I found that you're just running into a wall that's insurmountable.
Right.
And you just have to wait for them to come around. And people who already believe in Jesus but reject the Urantia book, well, we really don't have to worry about them. They'll get it, if not here, then on the mansion worlds.
Right.
Which is supposed to be the first of the 7 heavens that we will ascend to someday.
Yeah, and I would add to that, there are, of course, the Urantia book does say that Jesus will one day return, and a lot of Urantia book readers that I've talked to say, well, he will return, and he will return probably before anything else. That will be the beginning of significant things happening on our planet. So I think people that would be which I tend to believe, and I think that would kind of put people's mind at ease that Jesus would return and start opening us up to that time where we're growing into the age of light and life. So I don't think people that believe in Jesus and read the Bible, I think there's a plan there that these folks wouldn't be blindsided with something like, oh my God, what is this? I think there will be, events that will transpire that they will then understand. And I've said that for years, even when I was back in the evangelical circles, that I used to tell my friends and people in the church, say, there may be some things we have right when we're looking at, prophecy, but there's probably a lot of things we have wrong, and what's going to happen if things start unwinding a little bit differently than what we think they are. There's going to be a lot of confusion. So, I think we need to have an open mind, and this was years before, I read the Urantia book. And that just might be the case, to a degree.
Yeah. I think the Urantia book and the Bible say that when he comes back, it'll be in spirit power or something to that effect. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I've heard people say that it will be more in spirit, and other people say, well, there will be some kind of physical manifestation that people will be able to see or detect,
Yeah,
But
we can only be sure he'll return sooner or later.
yeah, and I think there will be no mistaking, when that happens, that who it is and what's happening. I don't think people would have to be um, too nervous about that when you're looking at things from the Urantia Book perspective. But anyway, getting back to Melchizedek, and correct me if I'm wrong, when he incarnated on the earth, uh, wasn't part of his mission to try to, part of your book, the Melchizedek mission is salvaging truth, because man was getting too far away from the truth of the one God, and he was kind of here to, rein things in, so, the truth didn't get too lost amongst all the different directions that humans were going in.
Yeah, that was the purpose of his mission, because they knew that Jesus was going to come pretty soon, and they needed to have a good, a sound basis for him to begin his mission, his ministry. And so his method, Melchizedek's method, was to establish a covenant with God. And of course, we're all familiar with that from both the Bible and the Urantia Book. The covenant stated that man agrees to, that God agrees to do everything if man will agree to just follow God, believe in God, and do His will. And Abraham was really sincere when he took that oath, and he had it put in writing, and he became a real evangel of that doctrine, that covenant, and it's ring down through the ages. And it also, spread out from Jerusalem. He sent his missionaries to India, to China, Africa, Egypt. He sent some of them to the West, what's now, Europe, and they all carried that message with them, and it resonated to some degree. And many of the later papers in Part 3 of the Urantia Book describe the effects that these missionaries had on the religious beliefs, and they point out lines and scripture in Buddhism and Hinduism and the other religions, and Islam, and of course Christianity, and its 45,000 sects all have something of Melchizedek's teaching still in them.
And it almost seems to me like we're repeating that history. That right now there's a lot of different ideas about who and what God is, or even if He is. And people kind of departing from that idea that there's one God, and maybe that there's many gods, or the pagan gods. We see a lot of people going back into like neo-paganism type of thing. So it's almost like we're repeating that history where man is kind of fragmenting and coming up with these the truth of the matter getting lost. So it almost seems like we are on the cusp of something significant, to rein things back in a bit before we get too far gone with our own ideas and speculations.
Yeah, it's a problem. Secularism and the scientific age, there's a lot of adherence to facts without really looking in depth at philosophy or theology, and a lot of people in the world are lost. It's sad, but I think the revelators saw that this was going to be happening, and that's why they sent the Urantia Book. And it's there, and the word is spreading, and people who are sincere in their truth-seeking will eventually find it. Or you hear people every day saying, "Oh yeah, I Googled something about Baal or something about Melchizedek," and I ran into the Urantia Book. A lot of times, people often say the Urantia Book found me instead of the other way around. But we just have to keep our nose to the grindstone, keep disseminating the teachings in any way we can. I mean, I've given away lots of Urantia books, but more often I just take a line or two out of it and drop that in a conversation, and it gets people thinking. And you never know how those seeds are going to sprout, or where, or when. But we've given plenty of seeds and lots of pearls to throw around out there to attract people to what I believe is the truth, that there is one God, and He's watching over us, and He sends His sons and daughters to take care of us, and it's a coordinated, organized universe that we will be so gratified to be a part of when we actually wake up on that next life. I mean, everybody here gets 100 years or less, and then we go on to a greater life. This is sort of testing ground to see if we have the right stuff. We're really interested in eternal life, and I think most people are.
Yeah, I think they certainly are. And it's funny you talk about the Urantia Book finding people. I had Derek Samaras on a couple weeks ago, and I was telling him the story that this is probably, I don't know, 96, 97, somewhere around there. I used to go to the Barnes & Noble every weekend, and, in the religious section here was the Urantia Book. And it was a blue book, and it had this weird kind of plasticky cover. And I had no idea what it was, and I never heard of it. I thought maybe it was pronounced the Urantia Book. And I would sit and I would read through it every week when I went to the Barnes and Noble. And there were a lot of things in there, like the thought adjusters, that part of God growing, our soul as we do the will of the Father, here in this life, and things I thought about, previous that I never heard anyone else talk about, but yet I never bought the book because I didn't know what it was. This was before the internet. I didn't know who wrote it. Was it some crazy cult, or somebody like a Jim Jones that, some fanatic. And it wasn't until about 6 years ago now, maybe a little over 6 years, I was watching YouTube, and I never put anything in about the Urantia Book, but I watched a lot of spiritual videos. And one day I turned on YouTube, and there in my recommendations, the first video was The Origins of the Urantia Book. And I was like, oh, there's that book. Where did that come from? So I immediately clicked on it and watched it, and then I watched other videos and, got a better understanding of what it was. And this was probably in the spring, early summer. And then that kind of dropped away. Life gets busy. And then that December, I work from home, and I was, on a break, and I was going back to my office to work, and it was like almost like an audible voice, but yet it was, within me, said just as clear as a bell, it's time to read the Urantia book. And it just stopped me in my tracks. And I remember, I was in this little hallway in our apartment, and I said, okay. And when I got done work that afternoon, I went on Amazon and I ordered a copy, and here we are.
Wow. Yeah, you mentioned Derek Samaras. He and I are friends, and he's a good man. I'd encourage your pod listeners to check that out. It was a good interview you did with him.
Yeah, it was very good. He's definitely a good guy. I got a lot of respect for him.
Yeah, me too. He's young too. I'm an old guy. I found the Urantia book in '86, and I'm 70. I'll be 75 here pretty soon. But I started writing Urantia book based novels 5 years ago after a conference, a reader conference down in San Antonio. Conferences always give me inspiration, and as soon as I came home, I started writing Resurrection Hall, the first of my 8 books, and then I followed that up with one about a conscientious objector who was in Vietnam, and his angels visited him at night and gave him revelations that were, of course, taken from the Urantia book. And then I wrote one about Adam and Eve. All of my novels are about 200 pages or so or less, and I stick pretty close to what's in the Urantia book. I just flesh out some of the details. And the next one was Melchizedek, and I followed that one up with one about the midwayers, who are beings that are halfway between angels and humans. You mentioned them in the introduction. They're the permanent citizens of the planet. The next one was about the Planetary Prince, which I mentioned before, and how he went into rebellion, and an individual who was part of his team, he salvaged the truth, and he lived on the planet for almost 500,000 years before Adam and Eve came. And my next book, and it was just the shortest one, I guess you couldn't call it a book, it's only about 5,000 words, is about the first humans, the first 2 people who exercised human will. And it's a fascinating story. They were twins, and they were born 1 million years ago, and all these details in the Urantia book that we don't get anywhere else. We can really know our real history now that we have this book. And the book that I'm working on now, my last one, is about the day that we find the non-breathers living on a world in close proximity to Urantia. That's one of the revelations in the Urantia book, that they say there are beings, and I think they are probably in our solar system. They just say, they use the words close proximity. So these beings are a different order than us. They live in an atmosphereless environment, and so I told their story. And when that's published in a couple of months, I'm going to join a team of writers. And I'm looking forward to this. We're going to create a series about Jesus' life, and we're going to write these little vignettes, and they'll be acted out and eventually strung together and put on a series like maybe you've seen The Chosen.
Yeah.
On Netflix. Well, it'll be the Urantia version of that.
Oh, that'd be great.
Yeah. Never a shortage of projects when you're a reader.
No, it's a big book with a lot of information to to go with.
Yeah, 2,100 pages, 1,000,000 words.
And I would say anybody that's interested in the Urantia book, I'm generally somebody, I read it, and then as I'm reading it, when I come across, certain topics like, Melchizedek or the Midwayers or the Thought Adjuster, I look for, other books, other authors who are Urantia book readers, and I'll read that book to kind of get more insight, the information they've gleaned.
There's a lot of secondary works out there, and they really help people understand. You can see the graphics on YouTube. There's some excellent ones there. I think if you go to YouTube and type Urantia in their search engine, you get over 700 hits. Secondary works are, I think, the revelators intended for us to write novels and write music and sing songs and paint pictures that reflect the teachings. So I guess you're pretty busy these days.
Yeah, I have my work that I do, and then I do the podcast. And I also have a little blog that I write, 4 or 5 days a week. That's, my way of trying to put seeds out there to get people to think about God and, living a better life. And of course, I, put things from the Urantia book out there, in both of those, because I think it's an important book. And, as I was going to say before, anybody that gets into the book and they want to read, some side material to get a better understanding, your books are very good. When I was looking at material for the Mansion Worlds, I really couldn't find that much, but that was the first book of yours that I bought, but I saw it was fiction. I was like, I don't know. But I couldn't find anything, and so I said, well, I'm going to buy this book and I'm going to read it at Resurrection Hall. And it was very very informative, kind of like, fleshing out, what the Mansion Worlds are, what will happen there, what, we could kind of expect. So, through your fiction, there's a lot of information, that, and it's not reading that's going to have people going, I can't understand this. What is he saying? And so
well, that's good to hear. That was my intention, was to put the information in the book out there and to get people reading the Urantia book, where the source of my books. So it's working.
Oh, definitely. So in our last, closing minutes here, getting back to Melchizedek, he eventually laid down his material body. He ascended back to, the realms where he came from. Would you say his mission was a success, or do you think mankind really kind of blew it by adding their own interpretations to it, or who he was and his teachings?
Well, the authors of paper 93 actually, the author, I guess it was Melchizedek, said that his mission was partially successful. And evidently it was successful enough to warrant Jesus going ahead with his mission. But, some people could look at Jesus and say his mission failed too, because he was crucified, but in the end, they tell us that all revelation finds roots in certain people, and certain other people it does not, and they just keep coming at us until we finally get it. But yeah, Abraham was really upset when Melchizedek disappeared. He didn't say a word. He didn't say goodbye or boo or anything. He just disappeared. And it was a real traumatic thing because he depended so much on him, and he went into a kind of a depression when he disappeared. But he came out of it all right, and he went ahead and did, founding 3 religions that half the people of the world now believe in. You can't call that a failure.
No, definitely not. And I think, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the Urantia Book said that Melchizedek just returned to his quarters one night, and then he was never seen again. It was like he turned in for the night, and he was gone.
Yeah. Must have been a shock to his whole school.
Now, what happened to the physical body that he had? It just dissolved and went back to the elements.
Yeah, they didn't say, but I think we can assume that he didn't want to leave anything behind that could be, construed as a relic or be worshipped or sanctified. They materialize his body out of nothing, and they can do the reverse process just as easily, I'm assuming.
And how many years was Melchizedek on the earth with his mission?
9 decades, 94 years.
Now, when the New Testament in the Bible says Jesus is a priest in the order of Melchizedek, what exactly does that mean, or does it mean anything according to the information presented?
That's a curious statement. Jesus was Michael before he became Jesus, and he is the creator and overseer of 10 million worlds, and he was part of his life mission, or his career mission, is to appear as one of his creatures in 7 different locations, and the 7th was here on Urantia. And he followed Melchizedek, and I'm assuming they just gave him that title because they associated him with that. He certainly was born much higher than a Melchizedek. In fact, Michael, who incarnated as Jesus, was the creator of the Melchizedek order. And I think there are 1 million Melchizedeks in Michael's universe of 10 million worlds.
Now, when you say Michael, that's not to be confused with the Archangel Michael, correct?
No, he's not the Archangel. That's a biblical character.
Yeah.
Who acquired that name. I'm not sure how that came about.
Yeah, because I've actually read, which I know this and you know this, but I've read some reviews of people who are very much against the Urantia Book, and they say, oh, this is like Seventh-day Adventists or Jehovah's Witness material, where they say Jesus was Archangel Michael, which is not true. It doesn't say that at all.
Yeah.
But you hear Urantia Book readers, and I've heard Derek say it as well. Jesus he's this, a son of God, but also God. He created our universe. He created, everything we see and don't see. As far as who knows, how big the universe actually is. So, it's not taking anything away from, Jesus and putting him as a glorified angel or, some such thing.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Which I think is also another, misconception that kind of scares people. And, hey, we probably talked about some things here that people are going, oh, wait a minute, I don't understand. And, it can be a little confusing. But, if you have any...
They can go to Urantia.org. Anyone can download the Urantia book for free. It's available in 24 or 25 languages now. Or they can, tap into the secondary works, books like I've written if they don't. Not everybody's going to read a 2,100-page book. It's just pretty intimidating for most people.
Yeah, it takes a while.
Yeah. You said it.
I try to do 2 or 3 chapters a day, in the morning when I do my personal spiritual time. And hey, before I knew it, I was through, this paper, then that paper, and then the end of the last paper.
Yeah. Well, if your listeners out there are at all interested in Jesus' life, the last 800 pages of the Urantia book is a retelling of it that is so beautiful and so complementary to the Bible and the New Testament. It just is touching it'll transform your life. It did mine anyway.
Yeah, and that's something that I actually wrote on Facebook in one of the Urantia groups I belong to. Someone asked a question about presenting the book and the information to people, and I said something, as far as me personally, there's the Bible, particularly the Gospels, which is kind of a foundation, and then of course the Urantia book. And when I talk about the Urantia book to people, I make it certainly known that it's not one of these cult or occultic works that's saying it's a replacement for, but rather it complements and explains and expands on, the teachings of the Bible. Yeah, so it's not a replacement. It's not something, hey, throw out your Bible and get the Urantia book. If anybody tells you that or that's what you think, that's absolutely incorrect. So, don't fret that somebody's trying to foist, something else upon you in place of the Bible, because that's, not the case.
If the Urantia book is a cult, then Jesus is our guru.
Yeah, I always tell people too. They say it's a cult. I said, well, how can you have a cult when there's no churches, there's no clergy, there's no leader.
Exactly. Yeah.
It was really meant for the individual, to help grow their soul and understand things, and
Absolutely.
The Urantia book talks a lot about our personal experiences with God, which I've always felt was important. And too much of, organized religion tries to take that away from people and say, no, it's not what you think, it's not what you feel, it's not what you know deep in your heart or what you've experienced, it's what we tell you that counts. And I think that's a very backward way that bleaches God out of people's lives and their experiences.
Well said. Well said.
And with that Jim Dandy statement, we're going to end the show here. And Richard, I appreciate you taking the time to come on and talk to us about these things and Melchizedek. It was a pleasure, sir.
Well, thank you. I'm glad you're doing this. You're providing a real genuine and worthy service here, and I'm going to go back and listen to your other podcasts.
Yeah, thanks
a lot.
Yeah, this particular show, I had another show called The Spirit Side, and it started out talking about religion and the paranormal, and then a little bit about some of the modern day conspiracies. So there's a lot of shows. I mean, there's some Urantia stuff kind of stacked in there. But I toward the end of last year, I wasn't podcasting as much. I wanted to make some changes. I wanted to talk more about the Urantia book and things that are positive, rather than so much negative, scary religion that's out there. So, hopefully, folks hear it and it brings a little light into their lives.
Godspeed, my friend.
All right.
Thanks again.
Yes, thanks again, Richard, for being on the show, and everyone out there, thanks for listening. We hope you got something out of this podcast today, and I'll see you next time here on the Ascension podcast next week. God bless everybody.